Owen asked the question on a Saturday in September in our backyard, in front of 22 people. Not because he had planned to, not because he had rehearsed it, or because anyone had coached him. He asked it because he was 9 years old, and he had been holding it for long enough that it came out of him. The way things come out of children who have not yet learned to perform the social calculation that tells adults when to swallow a true thing. He asked, "Grandma Gloria, do you not love us because we're adopted?" The backyard went quiet, in the specific way of a space where 22 people have all stopped breathing at the same moment. I want to tell you what had happened to produce that question. I want to tell you the precise sequence of the afternoon. Because the sequence is the reason the question was possible. And the question is the reason. Everything that came after was possible. My name is Nadia. I am 37 years old. Marcus is 39. We adopted Leo and Owen from foster care when they were 18 months old. They are twins. They are 9 now. They have been ours since they were 1.5, and they have been mine in every way since the first moment I saw them, and there has never been a day since that moment when I have experienced them as anything other than my sons, which is the only thing they have ever been. Marcus's mother Gloria is 64 years old. She has been present in their lives since they arrived. She has been at the birthday parties. She has been at the school events when she could. She has sent Christmas gifts and she has taken the boys to the park, and she has, on the surface of every observable occasion, been their grandmother. The surface is not the whole story. The surface is the part you can see if you are not paying the specific kind of attention that a mother pays to the treatment of her children over years. I had been paying that attention since they were 2 years old. I had logged the things. Not formally, not in a document, but in my own internal register, the way that people who love children watch for the small calibrations of treatment that mean something. I had logged that Gloria called them the boys in most contexts and called the other grandchildren by their names. I had logged that the Christmas gifts for Leo and Owen were always slightly less considered than the gifts for Marcus's sister's children. Not dramatically. Slightly. The kind of slightly that could always be explained individually and could not be explained in aggregate. I had logged that the extended family photographs that Gloria kept in her house, the gallery wall in the hallway that had grown over the years to include every grandchild and every significant occasion, did not include Leo and Owen. I had raised this with Marcus twice. Both times he had said he would talk to her. Both times the conversation had apparently occurred. The wall had not changed. Leo had been looking at the wall for 3 years. He had never said anything to me about it. I knew he had been looking, because Owen told me afterward that Leo had mentioned it the last 3 times they had visited. Leo had not mentioned it to me. He was 9 years old, and he had learned, somehow, to carry that specific observation quietly. Children carry things quietly when they have assessed that raising them will cause pain to the adults they love. Leo had assessed correctly. He loved his grandmother. He did not want to name what the wall was telling him. Owen was different. Owen was the kind of child who did not yet have the calculus that separates true things from sayable things. He was working on it. On the Saturday in September, he had not yet completed the calculation. On the Saturday in September, Gloria had come to the twins' birthday party. She had sat at the table under the oak tree, and she had eaten the cake, and she had watched the games, and she had been warm in the way she had always been warm. The particular warmth that was real on the surface, and had something underneath it that I had spent 7 years quietly identifying. The boys had made her a card, not a birthday card. Her birthday was 2 weeks away, and they had gotten confused and made her a birthday card for the wrong occasion. The kind of mistake 9-year-olds make when they are excited and generous and not paying attention to the calendar. They had made it themselves, at the craft table that afternoon, with construction paper and coloured pens. Owen had drawn her house on the front. Leo had written inside in his careful printing, It said, "To Grandma Gloria, we made this because we love you." From Leo and Owen. They had given it to her together. Gloria had looked at the card. She had looked at the drawing. She had said, "This is very sweet." She had said, "It is just too bad these things never feel quite as genuine as when a real grandchild makes them." There was a pause. Not long. Approximately 4 seconds. Then Owen looked at her. He said, "Grandma Gloria, do you not love us because we're adopted?" I am going to tell you what happened in the 20 seconds after Owen asked that question, before I tell you what happened next. Those 20 seconds are the most important part of the afternoon. Gloria's face did the thing that faces do when they have been asked something true that they were not prepared for. Not guilt, exactly. Something more structural. The face of a person whose architecture has just been exposed. She said, "Of course I love you." The speed was wrong. Not too fast in the way of a practiced denial. Too fast in the way of a reflex that arrived before thought. Owen looked at her. He said, "Then why don't you have our pictures on your wall?" He said, "Leo has been looking at it for 3 years." The second sentence was the one that stopped the party. Not because it was louder than the first. Because it was Leo's. Leo was standing 2 feet away from Owen. He was holding his piece of birthday cake. He had gone completely still. He had not known that Owen was going to say that. He had not known that his private observation, the one he had carried to himself for 3 years and told his brother quietly on the last 3 visits, was going to be said out loud in the backyard in front of 22 people on his birthday. He looked at his grandmother. His grandmother looked at him. The 22 people looked at both of them. I looked at Marcus. Marcus was looking at his mother with an expression I had not seen on his face before. It was not anger. It was recognition. Marcus had known about the wall. He had spoken to his mother about it twice. He had accepted the explanations she had given on both occasions. He was looking at her now in the expression of a man who had accepted insufficient explanations and was watching his 9-year-old son name the insufficiency in front of the family. Gloria said, "Leo, of course you and Owen are on my wall." She said it with the specific firmness of someone who is correcting a misunderstanding. Leo said, "We're not." He said it quietly. He said, "I looked last time. We're not there." Marcus's sister, who was sitting 4 places down the table, looked at her own husband, his mother's brother and his wife, who had attended every family gathering for 30 years and who knew the hallway gallery wall as well as anyone, looked at each other. Nobody said anything. I said, "I think we should have some more cake." I said it as a container, not as a resolution. As a container, to hold the afternoon together long enough for the children to have their party, which was their birthday party, and which they had the right to have without it being the afternoon their grandmother was confronted in a garden. Leo and Owen had the rest of their party. They had the rest of the cake. They had the pinata and the games and the presents, and they were 9 years old, and they recovered in the way children recover. Because children live in the present, and the present had a pinata. Gloria was quiet for the rest of the afternoon. She left at 5. She said goodbye to the boys. She hugged them both. Owen said goodbye Grandma Gloria in his normal voice. Leo said goodbye in the voice of someone who is deciding what to do with something they have been carrying for 3 years and have now seen confirmed in front of 22 people. After everyone had gone, I sat on the back step with Marcus. He said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "She said it in front of everyone." I said, "Yes," he said. "Not as genuine as when a real grandchild makes them." I said, "Yes." He said, "Our sons made her a birthday card on their birthday." I said, "I know." He said, "She has known them for 7 years." He said, "They call her Grandma." He said, "Leo has been looking at that wall for 3 years." I said, "Yes." He said, "I am going to call her." I said, "I want to be in the conversation." He said, yes, we called Gloria that evening, not in anger. I want to be clear about that. I had spent the hour after the party deciding what I wanted from the conversation, and I had decided that anger was not the instrument. Not because I did not feel it. I felt it completely. But anger at Gloria would close the space, and I needed the space open because there was something inside the conversation that I needed to understand. I had watched her face in those 20 seconds. I had watched the architecture exposed. There was something underneath the coldness. Not malice. Something older and more structural than malice. I wanted to find it. Marcus held the phone between us. He said, Mum, I need to talk to you about what Owen asked today. She said, I know. She said it quietly. He said, not as genuine as when a real grandchild makes them. He said, that is what you said. She was quiet. He said, Leo has not been on your wall for 3 years. He said, he knew. He said, he has been carrying that for 3 years without telling us because he did not want to upset anyone. She said, I did not know he had noticed. He said, he noticed. He said, you have photographs of every other grandchild in that hallway. He said, why not them? She was quiet for a long time. The silence was not the silence of someone who was formulating a defense. It was the silence of someone who was standing at the edge of something and deciding whether to step forward. Then she said something. She said, my brother was adopted. She said it in the voice of someone opening a door that has been closed for a very long time. She said, when I was 7 years old, my parents adopted a baby boy. She said, he was 8 months old. She said, before he came, I was the only child and everything in the house was mine, and my parents' attention was mine, and I was the person they organized their love around. She said, and then he arrived, and within 18 months everything had shifted, and I was no longer the person they organized around, and he was. She said, I know that sounds. She stopped. She said, I know how it sounds. She said, I was 7 years old and I felt replaced by a baby who was chosen, and I have carried that feeling for 57 years, and I have never addressed it, and I have never resolved it, and I put it on your sons who have done nothing to deserve it. And I sat in your garden today, and I said a thing that a 9-year-old heard and understood and asked about out loud, and I am ashamed of myself. She stopped. The silence was different now. Marcus and I looked at each other. He said, Mom. He said, thank you for telling me that. He said, that does not excuse what Leo and Owen have experienced for 7 years. She said, I know. He said, but I understand now what I was looking at. He said, we need to figure out what happens next. I said, Gloria, I'm going to tell you what I need. She said, tell me. I said, I need Leo and Owen to be on your wall. I said, not as a gesture and not because we asked. I need you to put them there because you have understood something about yourself and you want them there. I said, I also need you to work with a therapist. Not our family therapist. A therapist who works with adoption dynamics. I said, because what you are describing is something you have been carrying since you were 7 years old. And you cannot resolve it without help. And you cannot show up differently for our sons without resolving it. She said, you are asking me to go to therapy, I said. I am. I said, not as a punishment. As a condition of the relationship we need to build. She was quiet. She said, yes. She said, yes, I will do that. I said, then we start there. Marcus squeezed my hand under the table. We finished the call. We sat in the kitchen. He said, she kept it for 57 years. I said, yes. He said, and then she put it on our children. I said, yes. He said, that is the most clarifying thing I have ever understood about her. I said, yes. He said, does it change what you need? I said, no. I said. She goes to therapy and the boys go on the wall and we rebuild from there. He said, that is fair. I said, it is the only fair version I have. I want to tell you what I did with Leo. Because the birthday party was his birthday, and he had learned on his birthday that what he had been quietly observing for 3 years was real. He had known. He had been right. He had been 9 years old and right about a thing that no child should have to be right about. I went into his room that night after the call with Gloria. He was not asleep. He was lying on his side in his bunk with the lamp on and a book open that he was not reading. I sat on the edge of the bed. I said, I want to talk about the wall. He said, okay. I said, I saw your face when Owen said it. He said, I didn't know he was going to say that. I said, I know. I said, Leo, I want to ask you something and I want you to be honest with me. I said, have you been carrying this by yourself? He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I didn't want to make it a thing. I said, I know. He said, it's just a wall. I said, it is not just a wall. He looked at me. I said, it is your grandmother's home and hallway, and she has put the people she loves on it, and you and Owen are not there. And that is not a small thing. And I'm sorry that you knew about it, and carried it, and did not tell me. He said, I thought if I told you it would upset Dad. I said, yes. I said, you were protecting everyone except yourself. He looked at me. He said, Grandma Gloria was crying on the phone, wasn't she? I said, yes. He said, is it going to be okay? I said, I do not know yet. I said, but I want to tell you something. I said, the reason it is not yet okay is not because of you. He said, I know. I said, I need you to know that I know that you know. He said, that sentence didn't make sense. I said, I know. He almost smiled. I said, Leo, you are my son. You and Owen are my sons. You have always been my sons. Nothing about that has ever been conditional. He said, I know, Mom. I said, do you? He said, yes. He said, but it's nice to hear it. I said, I will tell you every day. He said, you do tell me every day. I said, good. He said, Owen always says everything out loud. I said, I know. He said, I never do. I said, I know. I said, that is okay too. Both ways are okay. He said, Owen was pretty brave today. I said, you both were. He said, I didn't say anything. I said, you have been carrying something for 3 years without letting it break you. That is brave in a different way. He said, it felt heavy. I said, I know. He said, it feels lighter now. I said, good. That is exactly what I needed to hear. He went to sleep. Owen was already asleep in the top bunk. I stood in the doorway of their room for a moment. 2 boys, 9 years old, who had arrived in our house at 18 months, who had learned to walk in our hallway, who had eaten breakfast at our table every morning of their remembered lives, who had made a birthday card for their grandmother on their own birthday because they loved her and did not keep score about whether they should. They did not keep score. Leo had not kept score. He had kept the observation. He had kept it because he was trying to understand something and was not ready to ask it out loud. Owen had asked it out loud. That is the difference between the twins. And it is also the same courage in 2 different registers. And both of them made me ache with the specific overwhelming quality of loving children who are doing the difficult human work of figuring out where they stand in the world. The therapist's name was Dr. Norshuku, and she specialized in adoption, attachment, and intergenerational family dynamics. Gloria attended her first session 3 weeks after the birthday party. I know because Gloria told Marcus. Gloria did not tell us what happened in the sessions, and we did not ask. The sessions were Gloria's. The work inside them was hers. What we knew was that she was going, which was the condition, and that she was going consistently, which was the evidence that she was taking the condition seriously. During the 7 months of the therapy process, Gloria's contact with the boys was limited, not severed. She called on weekday evenings. She sent books that she had chosen specifically for each of them, which was different from before, when the gifts had been slightly less considered. She sent Leo a book about architecture, because she had somehow remembered that he had said once, 2 years earlier, that he wanted to design buildings. She sent Owen a book about the science of weather, because Owen asked questions about storms constantly, and she had paid enough attention to know it. The boys received the calls and the books with the natural acceptance of children, who do not analyze the shift but absorb its warmth. They began to call more often on their own. Leo called her on a Tuesday in January to tell her his school project had been selected for the display. He called her first, before his grandparents on my side, before his uncle. He called Grandma Gloria. She called me afterward and said, "He called me." I said, "I know." She said, "He called to tell me something good." I said, "Yes." She said, "Nadia." She said, "I want you to know that I am doing the work." I said, "I know, Gloria." I said, "I see it." She said, "I want Leo and Owen to know that I am their grandmother, not out of obligation, because they are my grandsons." I said, "I know." I said, "Show them." She said, "Yes." The birthday party was in April. Gloria's birthday. She turned 65. She had not told us she had made a decision about the wall. She had not told us she had done anything. We arrived at her house with the boys and the cake, and the card they had made. Owen made the card again, the same way, with construction paper and colored pens. Leo had helped this time. They had not confused the date. It was her actual birthday. They had drawn her house again. They had written inside. It said, "To Grandma Gloria, we love you. From Leo and Owen." Gloria met us at the door. She hugged the boys. She said, "Come inside." We went into the hallway with the gallery wall. Leo went in first. He stopped. He stood completely still for a long time, looking at the wall. Owen came in behind him and stood beside him, and they both looked together. The wall had been changed, not reorganized, expanded. In the center of the wall, where the largest frame was, there were 2 photographs. Leo and Owen, side by side. Their school photographs from this year, 9 years old, in the frames that were larger than every other frame on the wall. I stood in the hallway doorway and I looked at Marcus and Marcus looked at me, and we did not say anything because there was nothing to say that the wall had not already said. Leo still had not moved. He was looking at his photograph, his own face on his grandmother's wall, in the largest frame, in the center. He had been looking at that wall for 3 years, and what he had seen for 3 years was absence, and what he was seeing now was presence. He turned around. He looked at Gloria. He did not say anything. He walked over to her, and he put his arms around her, and he held on. And Gloria held him back, and neither of them said anything. And there was nothing to say. Owen took his phone out of his pocket. He walked up to the wall and he photographed the 2 frames, his and Leo's, in the center of the wall. Gloria said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Keeping it." He set it as his wallpaper right there in the hallway. He held up the phone so she could see. He said, "Now I have it everywhere. I want to tell you about the birthday party. Not the September one, the April one." Gloria's 65th birthday. We stayed for 4 hours. There was the cake, and there was the lunch that Gloria had made, and there was the conversation at the table that moved between all the things families talk about when they are actually talking, school and work, and what Leo was going to design when he became an architect, and whether Owen's science project would win the regional competition, and what Marcus and his father were planning for the summer. The conversation moved with the ease of people who are not managing anything. That is the detail. We were not managing anything. We were just at a family lunch. Gloria had been managing something for 57 years. A wound that she had carried since she was 7 years old in a house where the arrival of one child had reorganized everything she had understood about where she stood. She had never addressed it. She had let it sit inside her, and she had not known, or had not let herself know, that she was replicating the wound on the children of her own son. A 9-year-old in a backyard had asked one question, and the question had opened a door that had been closed for 57 years. Owen had not known what was behind the door. He had only known that the question was true and that true things needed to be said out loud. That is Owen. That has always been Owen. The difference between the twins in this and in everything is the difference between Leo's 3 years of private, careful carrying and Owen's 4 seconds of decisive saying. Both of them are right. Both of them got there. They got there together, the way they do everything, which is in their own different registers in the same direction. I want to be honest about something. I was angry with Gloria for a long time. Not the hot anger that wants to act. The cold anger that sits in the chest and weighs something. The specific weight of watching your children be treated as less than, and not being able to name it precisely enough to address it, until a 9-year-old names it in a backyard. I had named it twice to Marcus. Marcus had addressed it with his mother twice. The addressing had not been sufficient. For 7 years it had not been sufficient. I am aware that the therapy and the wall and the birthday call from Leo and the wallpaper do not undo 7 years. I am aware that Leo carried a weight for 3 years that he should not have needed to carry. I hold that. I do not expect to put it down completely. What I put down, in April, in that hallway, was the specific weight of the cold anger. Not because Gloria had been forgiven in a tidy final way. Because she had done the work. She had done the required work in the required time. Without shortcuts and without resistance. And the evidence of the work was not a conversation or an apology. It was 2 photographs in the largest frames in the center of a hallway wall. Evidence I could see with my eyes. Evidence Leo had been looking for 3 years. Evidence Owen had photographed and set as his wallpaper so he could carry it everywhere. The cold anger put down does not mean the memory lifts. It means the weight changes. The weight changed in the hallway in April, and I was glad for the change. Let me tell you where we are now. It is 7 months since the birthday party. Leo is designing buildings and the architecture software his uncle installed on the family computer. Owen won the regional science competition. His project was on storm prediction systems. He dedicated it to his grandmother in the acknowledgements, not because we asked him to, but because she had sent him the book that had been the first source in his bibliography. The wall is the same. We visited last week. Owen photographed it again. He said, just checking. The photographs were still there. The largest frames. The center. Still there. He pocketed his phone. He went into the kitchen to see what Gloria was making. He said, "It smells like the good soup." She said, "It is the good soup." He said, "Good." I stood in the hallway for a moment alone. I looked at the 2 photographs. Leo and Owen, 9 years old, in the frames that are the largest on the wall. I thought about a question asked by a child in a backyard in September. I thought about a door that had been closed for 57 years, and the question that opened it. I thought about the weight that was not gone, but had changed its shape. Then I went into the kitchen because the soup was ready, and Owen was already at the table and Leo was coming in from the hallway, And Gloria was setting the bowls down with the specific attention of someone who is choosing to be present in the moment, who is not managing anything but is simply being here, which is all anyone needed from her, and which she is, 7 months later, learning to do. That is the whole story. Every word of it true. Every word mine. Here is my question for you. If your Milil had subtly treated your adopted twins as less than her other grandchildren for 7 years, and your 9-year-old son asked her directly in front of 22 people whether she loved them, would you have offered her the path I offered Gloria? Or would you have ended the relationship entirely? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. One more thing about the wall. I have thought about it many times since April. Not the specific photographs, though I have thought about those. I have thought about what the wall is. It is a gallery of the people Gloria loves. It grew over years, one photograph at a time. Each edition a statement of who belongs. A wall like that is never just decoration. It is the visible record of a person's emotional life. Every person on it is there because someone decided they were worth the wall. Leo had understood that since he was 6 years old. He had looked at the wall every visit and done the arithmetic that children do when they are trying to understand where they stand. And he had found himself and his brother absent from the calculation. He had not said it out loud. He had held it. For 3 years he had held the arithmetic and its answer, and he had been 9 years old. Owen had asked one question, and the arithmetic changed. The answer changed. And now the photographs are in the largest frames in the center. And when Owen photographs the wall to check, they are still there. He is not checking because he doubts. He is checking because some things are worth confirming. Some things are worth the photograph. He set it as his wallpaper because he wanted to carry it everywhere. That is the right instinct. Carry the good things. Carry the evidence of being wanted. Carry it as your wallpaper and check it when you need to and know that it is there. Leo and Owen are on the wall. They are in the largest frames in the center. They have always deserved to be there. Now they are. That is the end.